my video off because I have to do a significant amount of jumping with this tiny human to keep her quiet. But welcome to the Sustainable Living series that is presented by the Oregon State Extension Land Steward Program, Master Gardener Program, and the Jackson Soil Water Conservation District. Today we have Rainwater Harvesting presented by Kora, and Kora is the Community Water Resource Conservationist at Jackson Soil and Water District, now in her 8th year. Still 8th year, Kora? Still 8th year at the district. She's providing technical and financial assistance to landowners in Jackson County to implement stewardship projects that protect and conserve water and other natural resources. Kora has her bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Southern Oregon University and has lived in the Rogue Valley for 24 years. We had Kora out in April for landscaping for water conservation, and now she's here to talk with us about rainwater harvesting. This morning, usually we would have a little bit of a PowerPoint before Kora's to give you some information, but we were having a little bit of technical issues this afternoon. But we will be sending out this recording is going to be available to all participants. And you can also check out our YouTube channel. If you search OSU Land Stewards on YouTube, you can find our Sustainable Living series, a bunch of different community classes that we have available on that channel. So if I am going to go ahead and hand it over to Kora, thank you for being here and presenting another wonderful presentation for us today.
Great. Thanks so much for the intro, Nicole. As Nicole said, my name is Kora Mousseaux. I'm the Community Water Resource Conservationist at Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. And today I'll be discussing rainwater harvesting. Yeah, she mentioned this recording will be posted to the Land Stewards YouTube channel, and you should also receive the slides of this presentation as well as some takeaway points, just kind of key notes that I distilled from the presentation in a few days. So no worries on trying to memorize every slide or anything. You'll get all of that. And I'll also list my email at the end if you have any follow-up questions as well. All right, let's get started. My presentation always likes to glitch when I try and advance whenever I share my screen. There we go. So I just wanted to go over a couple disclaimers before we get started, just because this is such a large topic. So us at the district, we're non-regulatory, non-enforcing. So when I'm talking about rainwater harvesting, I'm not talking about from like the county's perspective. Obviously, as we're helping folks install rainwater harvest and do these classes, we have to be aware of all the ordinances to make sure that we are, talking about accurate information. I will have some ordinance slides, so I just wanted to have a disclaimer page that in case something changes, make sure to contact your local municipality before installing to make sure that you are informed of the codes in your area. And I also wanted to review kind of the presentation scope. Rainwater harvest is such a large topic and it can get quite complex. So this conversation is certainly not comprehensive by any means. The goal that I have with teaching this class is to teach you the basic steps, planning and installation steps, get you thinking, but there's certainly other aspects. For example, we only cover non-potable water systems. So if you're interested in installing a potable water system, it's beyond this talk, even though you could certainly use this as a foundation and then install that on your own. I also will be focusing on above ground systems. You can have buried systems, but again, it's kind of more engineered. So just kind of wanted to mention that just to kind of explain the scope of things. And so here's a brief outline of what I'll be discussing today. And I will mention, as I think Rachel mentioned, if everyone could stay muted during the presentation, that would be great. I do have a Q&A time allocated at the end, and folks can unmute during that time, and it can be more of a casual conversation. If you have questions throughout, feel free to type them in the chat box, and then I'll address them at the end. And yeah, I think that's all the housekeeping on that respect. So I'll give a brief overview on the district if you're not aware of us, and then I'll go into some basic overviews on water conservation, stormwater management, and then rainwater harvest. I'll then talk about the steps to actual rainwater harvest installation. I then have a bunch of project examples from projects that I've helped install just to give you kind of some design and setup ideas. And there's also a lot of photos out there online too. And then I'll review a 3-step personal action summary that this Sustainable Living series does. And they do that with all of the classes that have been done to kind of help give you some action steps moving forward. And then we'll have our Q&A. And then if any time remains, I have some resources that I'll review. And if we don't get to all of those resources, those will be linked into those notes that you'll be receiving. So hopefully it'll give you a nice building block moving forward if you're interested in installing rainwater harvest on your property. All right, so just a brief overview on the district. So we are a special district, so we are funded similar to a school or a fire district in that we have a tax base. So for every $1,000 of assessed property value, Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District receives 5 cents. And that helps us with our oversight, that helps with our salaries, and that also helps us with our small grants program. So we have been around since 1966. Conservation districts were really born out of the Dust Bowl era. So the first were back in the 30s to help farmers with the arid conditions, soil conditions. And so we've been around since the 60s, and that tax rate was passed back in 2006. So really our bread and butter and our main focus is to provide technical assistance to Jackson County residents. And we do that through an array of means, but we're essentially paying everyone back for the tax rate. So we're able to offer a lot of free educational assistance. We do free site visits, property consultations. And then we also have a small grants program that's quite competitive. I'll be reviewing a rebate program that I have specifically for rainwater harvest at the end. And folks are welcome to reach out to me if you're interested in learning more about that rebate program. And so, yeah, we offer a bunch of different things at the district, trying to help people conserve their natural resources. So these are the different programs that we offer at the district. My area of focus is community water. So I do a lot of work in residential water conservation and stormwater management, lawn replacement work, and rainwater harvesting work. I've also helped with rain garden installation, bioswales installation, taught a couple classes specifically on those that are all available on the YouTube channel, the SOREC YouTube channel. And these different resources, each of our conservationists really run our own program. So we have a forestry conservationist, riparian conservationist, an ag conservationist. So everyone works in their little individual silos in terms of the particular resource concern, and then we all collaborate since natural resources overlap. All right, so that's just a very general overview of the district. Now I'm going to go into kind of big picture water conservation and then stormwater management, and then we'll dive into rainwater harvest. So, and I wanted to just provide a very, very big picture overview because rainwater harvest really helps check both boxes in water conservation and stormwater management. It really, yeah, both, I really view them as one and the same. It's all water management at the end of the day. And so we rely on snowpack as our primary water source. And so because of that, it's important that we conserve water as much as possible, because as we all know, our climate varies. Some winters, we receive a lot of snow and we have a, pretty good amount of water storage. In other years, it's not so great. And so it's nice to err on the side of caution. Compared to other areas, our water here isn't as expensive, but it certainly is more expensive than I know a lot of us would like. And so another major thing with water conservation is that it saves you money, particularly if you are on a well. That can be incredibly expensive to manage and maintain. And, you know, we live in such an area with such an inconsistent aquifer. Some people have a super deep well and it's, you know, super great. And other folks don't. And they would rather have their well, you know, fulfill their household needs, and then their, you know, outdoor irrigation could be supplemented. So that water conservation can come in a lot of ways, but it's both beneficial to the environment and helps you save money. And as Nicole had mentioned, I had taught a class specifically on water conservation as it relates to outdoor water savings. And I think I also talked about indoor a little bit as well. So if anyone is interested, particularly on water conservation, that's on the SOREC YouTube channel. And then stormwater management. So stormwater, so back before we lived in such a built up world and, you know, pre-industrial revolution, when water fell, we had way less impervious surfaces. So when water would fall, it would just go into the groundwater or surface waters. It would replenish the soils, and that would be that. But now that we have such a built-up environment, we have roofs, we have sidewalks, we have streets, that water can cause some flooding issues. It can also carry a lot of pollution. And so then when it does re-enter waterways, it can cause issues. So managing stormwater in a way that's holistic, looking at all the different ways water comes from and goes, and trying to essentially clean water or retain water and clean whatever water is running off your site is important to make sure that all of our streams and groundwater stays as clean as possible. So there's lots of different types of stormwater management features, also known as green infrastructure, low impact development, but rainwater harvest can certainly check a lot of boxes for stormwater management as well. So it can reduce on-site erosion and off-site sedimentation. So it helps with the quantity of water leaving the site and hopefully improving the water quality as well. Okay, and so rainwater harvest is the process of capturing that stormwater that typically would just be flowing from your roof and going into, you know, whatever storm drain or ditch that you have, and it's providing water storage. So it's helping both storage and manage that stormwater. And there's lots of different benefits to rainwater harvest. Certainly not comprehensive, but kind of the main benefits that I've observed, particularly from talking to folks around the valley, is that number one, it helps with supplemental irrigation. It helps offset your irrigation source. So whether you are on city water, whether you are on a well, or for your irrigation, if you have rights through an irrigation district, if you have water rights, it just helps supplement that existing water source to save water. It also can help with that stormwater management, with that runoff reduction. So a lot of times, if we have, you know, a large storm event, particularly if an overflow for the roof and, you know, plumbing and your downspouts, if it's not piped correctly, water can collect around the home and around the foundation, and it can cause drainage concerns and pooling and flooding. And you don't want that because it could potentially damage your foundation. So by having a rain tank, it could actually help divert that water and help improve your infrastructure protection. Another benefit to collecting water is you could use it for livestock rather than using your well for livestock. You could use rainwater harvest. The more and more for different drinking water and whatnot, you might want some more filtration. Excuse me, all of a sudden my throat's really dry. And we'll go over filters in a little bit, but it certainly helps with that. And then a big one is fire suppression. Having extra water on hand in case of emergency is just comforting in today's day and age with drought. And a lot of folks will actually fix their tanks to size a fire hose, and you can have a tank closer to your driveway, and that way emergency vehicles could access it. So lots of different benefits to rainwater harvest. I've seen a huge surge in interest in installing these systems, and I realized I've already progressed. And yeah, so those are just some of the benefits. And so here are 8 main steps in installing the rainwater harvest system. Certainly a lot of these are like a feedback loop, and so it's not always in this order, but this makes most sense to my brain, and so hopefully it's digestible. And again, all of these steps are in those takeaway notes as well. So going into the local ordinances, so a lot of people aren't aware of rainwater harvest legality, or they heard it was illegal, or they don't know when it's illegal. So I'll start from the state and then work our way to local. So rainwater harvesting is allowed within the state of Oregon, but it's a yes and sort of deal. So yes, you're allowed, and it needs to be collected from a roof. It needs to be collected from an impervious surface. Once the water hits the ground or surface waters, it's considered waters of the state. And so you have to collect from a roof and divert it from the roof in order for it to be legal. And so I refer to the Building Codes Division Oregon Smart Guide. You can just Google, Oregon Smart Guide, and this will pop right up. They also have, I know there's hard copies of this floating around. We might have a few at our office, and this is also a PDF you can download online. And it just goes over the general Oregon guidelines for rainwater harvest collection. And there's also some sections in here about potable water collection, if that's of interest to you as well. And then going into Jackson County. So this was a table that I created with our board chair, who's an engineer, years ago, because we wanted some clarity on what scenario would trigger a county permit when. So again, before installing a system, it's always good to check with the county. My understanding is none of this has changed, but just, we're not the regulators. I'm just referring to the information that I'm aware of. So first and foremost, if you're simply installing a system to help with supplemental irrigation, it likely will not trigger a permit with the county unless these other factors apply. So simply offsetting irrigation likely will not trigger a permit. If you are installing a potable water system, it absolutely will. They need to make sure that there's proper filtration and proper plumbing. So that would definitely trigger a plumbing permit, and that's a separate section within the county code. It's Appendix K. If you were installing a system for inside the home, so for non-potable use, but for like toilet flushing, I haven't heard of anyone installing it for this particular use, but I think it is possible. Again, plumbing, because that would impact the plumbing of your home. If you have a fixed pump in a pump house and it's not a portable pump, so just a plug and outlet, that could potentially trigger an electrical permit. And so that would be something to consider. I normally recommend folks install a portable pump so they just don't have to worry about it. If your tank is larger than 5,000 gallons, it likely would trigger a building permit. Also, I should mention this table is also in those notes, so you do not have to memorize this. If you have 2 5,000 gallons, it still would not trigger. It's going off of the tank size and not the gallon storage. If you have like 10 tanks, they might want to look at it, but I've had folks install, 2 5,000 tanks, and the county said, no, that's totally fine. So yeah, just something to consider. They're looking at the weight and just making sure that, it's super stable. It could potentially trigger a building permit. And then finally, if you are located in the 100-year floodplain, that would trigger a county land development ordinance permit or a floodplain review. And honestly, that's a pretty long process. It doesn't sound particularly fun or easy. And so if you are located within that floodplain, it's just not practical to install a tank. But if you're aware of that overlay, so if you know there's certain sections, if you're in a floodplain in your tax lot and certain sections that you're not, I would just recommend placing the tank not in that floodplain area. So those are the main things that would trigger a permit, but most systems that I help with do not. Most of them are 5,000 gallons or less, and they're just used as a simple supplemental irrigation with a portable pump. If they do use a pump, pumps are totally optional, just depends on your system. And that's kind of going to be the running theme with today's talk. A lot of these designs are case by case, which is really great because you could customize them based on your site and based on your needs, but it makes it a little challenging in explaining things because everything just differs so much. So the only other municipality, other city besides the county that I'm aware of that has an ordinance particularly for rainwater harvesting is Ashland. And most of it is very similar to the county. The only things that really differ is that they have a height requirement. So the tank can't exceed 6 feet. And they also have a clearance requirement with a property line. It can't be, it needs to be at least 3 feet or more away, which makes sense just from an infrastructure perspective. And it needs to be on a level foundation, which that's a requirement within the county too. Either like a gravel pad or a concrete pad, just so the tank has flat, stable ground. And another unique thing about Ashland is that the tanks, they call them rain barrels. Rain tanks, rain barrels are used interchangeably, just so you know, in terms of semantics. Ashland asks that they be screened from view from adjacent properties and from the streets as much as possible. So for example, I've had folks in Ashland, they had smaller barrels, but they had them like behind a fence and kind of tucked away behind some bushes. So it was completely screened from everyone. But that's my understanding is more of an ask and less of a, strict requirement, but I think that's just more of an aesthetics thing. So those are all of the ordinances pertaining to rainwater harvesting. Feel free to reach out to your local municipality, or if you have further questions, you can ask me and I can help refer you as well. But it's mostly the county and areas that, if you're in a city that doesn't have the permit requirements, we just defer to Jackson County in terms of the recommendations and the specifications, but you just wouldn't have to worry about filing a permit. So it makes it a little easier. All right. So now regarding the planning steps is determining your property needs. It's kind of, you kind of want a baseline in terms of what you're working with in order to plan your system. So the questions to ask yourself are, what are your current and future water needs? And I put future in there because, some folks, their current systems fit their needs now, but do you anticipate that changing? Are you seeing, maybe your well is fulfilling your needs now, but maybe you have some future plans for your yard, for your pasture, depending on if you're urban or rural. Maybe, you have some future plans that you think would involve more water, or maybe your well isn't recharging as much as you'd want. So basically, what are you working with and what are your current needs? How much water does your property use currently as well? And so if you're on the city, that's pretty easy to calculate. You can just look at your water bill and your water usage. If you're not on the city, I recommend that you get a water meter. A lot of folks don't have them for their wells, but it's a nice way to kind of start, have a baseline to know how much water you're using within a given day, week time frame. Because once you know your water usage, then you can know, okay, this is how much water I'd want to offset then. And then also, how reliable is your primary water source? What are your current drainage and stormwater runoff routes? That will be important because you'll need overflow plans within a rainwater harvest system. And then, what are your downspouts? What's your roof like? These are all things that are important for the system as well. So what's the existing infrastructure? And then how much supplemental water do you need? So you can calculate how much water you're using, but if you have the ability to supply a good chunk of that, how much you know, what's a practical amount that you'd want to supplement? So just all different kinds of questions. And again, it's very much a feedback loop with these steps, but it's nice to know what you're working with in order to know how to conserve and, you know, what stormwater to offset. With all the projects I ever do, I always recommend folks start super small and practical. So I'd rather you over plan than jump the gun too quickly and build out this, you know, huge expensive system that maybe you didn't need it to be that extravagant. It can be more simple. All right, I'm trying to progress. Let's see. Is this working? Okay. So yes. So determine the location of your system. So once you can kind of determine, all right, this is how much water we use. This is kind of the rough ideas of where you anticipate, you know, your property water usage going. Then you can determine where you'd want to house this system. So I think I'll kind of talk out of order, but so there's kind of two main options as to where to have your main tank. So the first, you could put it closer to whatever building you're capturing from. So you can capture from a home, barn, shed, anything with a roof you can collect. And so you can put the tank closer to that, or a lot of folks will also collect from that roof and then pump it out to a tank. I don't have a particular preference at the district. For us, it's just, does it fulfill your needs and is it installed properly? And is the system functional? So those are kind of things to think about. You want to think of, you know, you don't want to block a window or view shed, different living spaces. You also want to think about where your gutters and downspouts are. If you want to put a tank closer to the foundation, it makes sense to put the tank under where the downspouts are. So just different things of planning out your site. And when I go out with site visits and I help folks plan their projects, I can help brainstorm where to locate your site. So if you ask, just kind of thinking out loud for future reference, if I'm not able to answer a question, if you have a location question, for example, because I'm such a visual person, this is also something I could help with in person. And also determine what roof you'd like to collect from. You can collect from your home, barn, or shed. Barns are great because they normally are larger. But something to mention is a lot of folks don't have rain gutters on their barns. And so that's something to consider, that you would need the gutters and then downspouts in order to install a system. And it needs to be on a flat and level area for installing. So to size the system, so we had already talked about how much water you are using in that planning step. And then what you can do is you can also calculate the maximum amount of water that you can collect per year based on the average precipitation in your area. So depending on where you are, it could be, you know, give or take 20 inches. So I just have that as the example, and it's the annual rainfall. And so this is just an example with 1,000 square foot roof. So not that large of a roof. This is a calculation that the state has. They're having it, multiplying it by a constant. It's taking evapotranspiration into account because a lot of water is lost due to that. So with 1,000 square foot roof, you could collect 9,200 gallons of water per year, which is a good amount. And so that's all year. And so obviously a lot of the water that we use is seasonal. So once you have that big picture number, then you can size your tank accordingly. We'll go over pricing in a moment, but you want to make sure you're not oversizing your system too much, because the larger your system is, the more expensive it's going to be. Speaking of the price, so lots of different things with planning the system. So you want to know the route of the rainwater harvest system. Where is that water going? And in order to know the route, you'll need to know what you're using the water for. So a lot of folks will use their water to supplement their gardens, vegetable gardens, landscaping gardens. You can use it for, again, fire storage. So you can have it pumped either away from the home or closer to the home just to have extra water on hand. So that route will really depend on the end use, but you can determine where you want that water to go. Also regarding planning and getting price points is, do you have the means of installing the system yourself, or do you want to hire contractors? Again, if you're working with us, we don't have a preference as long as it's done properly. And a lot of our clients do have, contractors help them install. It's just worth it for them to make sure it's installed properly. We actually have a contractor list at the district. And so you can email me and we'll send that to you. We can't recommend one particular company, but we've just created a long running list of folks that our clients have worked with. And I also went and included as many vendors as I was aware of as well. So for both contractors or just buying system parts, we have that list available. And so in terms of price points, on average, it's about $1 a gallon for a system. So if you're installing a 5,000 gallon system, so that includes the tank, the plumbing, downspout diverters, whatnot, it's about $5,000. Now it's a little bit more expensive, of course, if you're going to be hiring contractors. So I did an exercise. I took, I think it was my past 25 grants that I've helped fund within this. Prior to that, it was a little too long ago, and I felt like it wasn't really representative due to inflation. And so it was really on the nose with $1 a gallon. And then it was $1.30 for everyone combined, and a good portion of those folks had contracted services. So that's about the price point that you'd be starting with. And it really varies. It can, be more or less. Some folks have been able to time it out and get some tanks or, other parts on sale, and it's been less than $1 a gallon. So it really depends on where you get the tanks. And also, on average, the larger the tank, the more water savings. The smaller the tank, it likely would be a little more than $1 a gallon. There are local vendors to purchase these supplies, but if you do ship them from, online, consider the delivery fees with that as well. And then determine your installation timeline. So a lot of folks will want to install in time for fall rains. And so late summer, around now, is when a lot of folks are installing these systems. So it's in time for the wet season. But the great thing about rainwater tanks, unlike a large landscaping project or a planting project, you could really install these systems any time of year. Even if you miss the majority of the rains that'll be set up for the following season. So it's not really, there's less of a rush than if it was a landscaping project, which is nice. There's flexibility in that. And then another very large thing is determining the overflow route. So once your tanks are full, it's important that you need to know where that excess water is going. You don't want your tanks to just overflow right then and there, and it could potentially cause infrastructure issues or drainage concerns for yourself or for your neighbors. So the most simple way to have an overflow plan is to divert that water back to where it was already going before you installed the system. So for, that'll depend on your property setup, but it can go into a storm drain or a culvert. You can divert water into existing drainage paths. And if you have, for example, like an adjacent pasture and you have quite a bit of land, I've had folks just pipe it into the pasture because that'll just naturally infiltrate into the soil and provide some extra water to the pasture as it's filtering down. You can also join tanks together. It's typically at the top, kind of with T-valves, and that can be a great overflow just from one tank to another. I just wanted to have a quick note, and we'll talk more about pipe freezing risk in the maintenance section. But from my understanding, the T-valves really don't have much of a risk with freezing, but if you join tanks at the bottom, it could freeze. So it's just something to consider if you want to join the tanks together. You could also divert the rain tanks into a stormwater feature. So I've had folks divert them into a rain garden, which I have a class on that, but it just very briefly, if you're not aware of what a rain garden is, it's a depression in the soil that is excavated. So you need to make sure you're not hitting any utilities. It's excavated, and then there's layers of amended rock and soil and mulch and plants. And it's designed to have water soak back into the soil. So you don't want standing water. You don't want to cause a pond or mosquito habitat, but it's providing a means to allow that water to infiltrate back into the soil. So that would be an option. You could do a bioswale or a rock basin, so layers of rock or plants kind of more in a strip, and divert water into that. If you happen to already have a dry well, if you've heard of dry wells, it's kind of more of an engineered rain garden where it's actually an underground, it's kind of more shaped like a well. They're very expensive. I would not install a dry well if you don't already have one, but that would also be a possibility. So again, we don't have a preference at the district of it has to be this overflow route. You just need to have one. And you want to be diverting it into where that water was going already. You don't want to cause a new overflow route that could potentially be diverting a bunch of water to your neighbor, for example, because then you would just be causing erosion issues downstream, so to speak. Yeah, so that's overflow. So now we're getting into constructing the system. So I distilled this all into one page. There's so many fact sheets online, it can be quite overwhelming. So we actually have a 2-page fact sheet that goes over the construction of the system. And that is also listed in our resources, and it's on our website. But these are the rough installation steps. Some contractors might do it a little differently, but this is, from my understanding, kind of the most straightforward way I could distill these construction steps for installing the rainwater harvest tanks. So, and some of these are also optional. The most notably float valves, first flush diverters, and pumps are optional. Pumps obviously are optional because some systems can be simply utilized with gravity fed. If you have it set up where a tank is upslope and then the end use is downslope, you won't need a pump, but a lot of times you'll just need a little more help. There's not enough pressure, and so pumps can be super useful. And then if your tank is upslope from where you're collecting, you'll need a pump to get the water up to that tank. And then first flush diverters are optional because some folks love them because it kind of helps, wash that first flow of water away. It's usually to wash any bird poop or different, debris that could be on your roof away. But I've also heard that people don't like them because they're very prone to freezing. You don't want any standing water in your system over winter. Obviously, all the water in your tank is fine. We don't live in a cold enough climate for the tank itself to freeze, but your pipes could freeze if there's standing water in the tanks or in the pipes, pardon me. And I've heard just mixed messages with first flush. And then float valves are optional because it just depends on how your system is, but some folks have more of an automated float valve where it's like a plastic ball or metal ball that's in the tank itself. And once it reaches a certain level, it'll basically trip the system to go into the overflow. So that's more of an automated. So that's why those are optional. But the main 6 steps, number 1, you have to install some sort of flat surface for the tank to sit on. And so a lot of folks will just do gravel. I recommend gravel more than concrete because we're trying to avoid the impervious surfaces, right? We're trying to increase that infiltration. So gravel is great. It's also makes the system more flexible if you ever want to move your tank. And folks will just install gravel, and some folks will do like that little wood block around the gravel just to keep it in place. And then installing the tank. You then want to install the downspout diverter to go into the tank. So that involves cutting that downspout to size, and then it's typically an elbow, like that 90-degree curve that will then go into the tank. Most of the time, folks have the water going at the top of the tank, but some systems are designed where the water is going in from the bottom of the tank. Really depends on the setup. And then you want to drill appropriate holes for overflow. So when I get into the project examples, you'll see pictures of a lot of different types of tanks. You'll see two pipes. One is the water going into the tank and one is the overflow. And then there's filter screens. There's all different types of filters. I recommend installing at least one screen so large debris is filtered out. You could even have a screen on top of your gutters before the water is even entering the gutters. You can filter out large debris such as leaves and any like pine cones and things like that. But there's kind of like finer mesh that can go where the pipe, like prior to even going into the tank, you can have mesh that goes from that downspout to the tank. And then there's also filters from the bottom of the tank prior to utilizing the water. So lots of different filter options. There really isn't a hard and fast, you have to use these amount of filters. It's very situational, but you just don't want debris building up in your tank. And then maintenance is a huge part of the system, checking for leaks since you're dealing with plumbing. I will say regarding maintenance, I think it would probably be easier to have the tank closer to your roof, just because if you need to access anything, it's all right there. If it's plumbed from your roof to the tank, if something were to happen, you'd have to dig into the plumbing. So it's kind of nicer when it's all there. But again, optional. Make sure that your filters and screens are cleared out several times a year. Make sure you clean out your gutters twice a year to make sure that the water flowing from your gutters is clean. And clearing out your elbows and downspouts as well to prevent clogging is important. You want to make sure that there's no standing water in your pipes during the winter. And so we call that winterizing the system. So once your tank is full and it's winter time, it's important to drain the downspout diverter pipe that's going into your tank, and then it's just going into that overflow once the tank's full. You just don't want any standing water in your pipe over winter, just to prevent any freezing. You also want to empty the tank about once a year just to prevent any algae growth, and that can just involve draining the tank or just not refilling the tank right away. Just rinsing it with a hose, call it good. And then every several years, it's recommended to actually clean the inside of the tank. You actually can scrub it. You can scrub it with more eco-friendly detergents or vinegar, and some people use bleach. Just, be careful where that water is going. And if you have a large enough tank to where you actually have to climb inside the tank, I would not because I'm claustrophobic, but just know that OSHA guidelines apply to that for safety. It's basically just recommended that the tank is cleaned enough so you don't have algae, gunky growth, because that's not going to ensure that the system's working as efficiently as possible. So yeah, those are the main maintenance steps for the systems. And now I'm going to go over some project examples. So, and I just kept client names off just for privacy, but I'll explain what towns these are all in and kind of the rough setup of the property. So hopefully it's helpful as examples. This first one actually was not one that I helped with. This was an ag project, so I couldn't tell you where it was, but I wanted to include it because it was a nice photo of a roof. And they had, so they were collecting from both sides of the roof. So collecting from this side and this side, all joining in for a tank. This pipe that is seemingly going nowhere, that's the first flush. And then they have going into the tank. And then I think they have an overflow pipe there at the bottom. This one over here is an ashland. And so you'll see a lot of setups like this. This is actually a filter right here. So this is the downspout. It was cut to size and it goes into this screen, which then goes down and goes to the tank. And this one is also, I believe, a first flush, and then we have this pipe, this corrugated pipe is overflow. So once the tank reaches this level, excess water is piped away. These little barrels were along a school in Jacksonville, and this is just a much smaller system just for their supplemental vegetable garden. And they just had a simple hose spigot, and then also connections to drip tape. This was the system at Sorex, so I labeled that one. This is collecting water from their greenhouse, and it's going into a series of tanks and piped, I believe the pipes underground for their overflow. And this is a series of tanks that were installed in Ashland. And so I believe this is just outside of the city ordinance. So this is technically Jacksonville, but it was very close to Ashland. But even if it were in the city, it was tucked away where it was screened from the public. And then that was their downspout pipe prior to entering into the tanks. This is a system in Talent, and this one was a little different because so they had their downspout going into this filter. So this, it's kind of in order. So we have this and then this. It was going into this existing holding tank, and then they had it pumped to this larger tank. And then they were using this larger one for irrigation. So some folks will also do that where they have water going into existing smaller tank. It's pumped uphill to a large tank, and then you can utilize gravity to then water downhill. So these systems can be as simple or as fancy as you want. Again, I recommend starting simple and working your way from there. This was professionally done. But if you were doing this yourself, I would probably recommend not starting off with this kind of two-tiered system just for maintenance ease. But yeah, this has worked great for them. And this is actually on the other side of their house. So they had another one. So they had placed this tank underneath their deck. And this is a very common placement for tanks. You could even size a taller one in here, but under a deck, kind of in that crawl space where there's, besides storage, you're not going to be hanging out under her all the time. It's a very common space for a tank. And so that is another option going into this. And then it is piped upslope into this larger tank. And this is, you can't even see it anymore, but that was the trenched pathway going, featuring a very cute doggo. But it was, going from this side all the way up to there. Here is one that's a little more engineered. This one is in Talent, and they lived on a steeper slope. So they had to dig a bit into the hillside and make it super flat. And then they're collecting from the roof, piped out, and into the series of tanks here. This is one outside of Rogue River, I believe. And this is collecting from this smaller yard. They had some gutters installed as well, just some simple K-style gutters. And these are tanks on either side of their barn. And they were primarily using this water for their vegetable garden, but there were also some livestock as well. And this is a more simple system where you see they don't have a first flush. There's not that extra pipe. There's just one going to the tank, and then this other pipe is overflow. And they have a couple different, they have that overflow, and then they have a spigot that connects to their hose. This is outside of Ashland. This is a great example of that concrete pad. And so this is just on either side of the building. You can see how tall this building is. And so they had to install this in kind of a zigzag pattern to get it down to the pipe. This is also done professionally. But that's the 5,000 tank. So when I talk about 5,000 is the maximum that is allowed prior to triggering the county ordinance. This is the size we're talking about. So it's very large. And this is outside of Ashland. And this is probably one of the smaller tanks that I've seen. I believe this was, I don't think it was 1,000. I think it was a little under, but it was super short. This was at like a mother-in-law suite sort of situation. So again, going into the filter, you have first flush as an option, and then going into the tank. And then this is an overflow pipe that then goes into their ditch. Same thing from this, and this is collecting from the home. They were able to utilize this existing kind of frame as of stability. So that was smart engineering. And that goes into this tank. And I believe that's 1,000, or that might be 1,500, just to give you an idea for size again. So this one was collecting off of a barn, and they were going to use this as livestock water primarily. And so this is 5,000. Actually, this might be 3,000. Connected, collecting from a barn. You could see both pipes going into each tank. And then overflow just goes into this little swale, and then it goes into their existing ditch, which was where the water was going anyways. This one is just outside of Ashland. So this is that dry well example. So they already had this. So they had a rain chain, so that water from their downspout would go into that. And then they had a cool engineered dry well that helped with their drainage there. And the excess water from this went into that, I think it was another dry well. And this was pumped, so from the house to out here, which was maybe 100 feet. It wasn't super far away from the home. And then they were using this also as supplemental water for their vegetable garden. I know there's a lot of photos here, just was trying to include as many examples to visualize everything. So this was outside of Ashland in the county, and they also had a couple tanks. So this one was also underneath their deck, another nice place to place a tank. And then this one was collecting off of their barn. And so I tried to capture photos. So this was taking from the roof to their tank. And this is a picture of the overflow going from the tank down, and then it was just going into their pasture because they had plenty of room to let that water dissipate out, and it was watering some fruit trees. I think we're getting there. So these are a couple photos. I believe this is outside of town. I just wanted to include this photo because it showed the underground trenching prior to filling it in. And then this was outside of Eagle Point, and they had a good amount of slope. You know, this was pretty downslope from their house, so they had good gravity feed. So this is just piped from the house going into this smaller tank, and then this is their overflow pipe, which is a hardline pipe, and then they just had a hose connected to the spigot, and they were using it to water their garden, and it worked great for them. This is outside of Ashland. And so this one, they're collecting from their garage, their detached garage, and that overflow is going into a rain garden. So this is an example of a rain garden where they have a nice berm. So excess water was being held into this area. And then they had a creek downstream that then any excess water from the rain garden would go, because rain gardens also require an overflow. But this was a nice kind of two-tiered system. They would get, during heavy stormwater events, their house was kind of downslope from living in the Wooey area, where it was pretty steep. And so they'd have water kind of run down this hillside and kind of create a wash in this area and cause some erosion issues. So not only were they deterring water from sitting around their foundation during the storm events, they were deterring it in this way, and also any excess overland flow could go into the rain garden and naturally recharge into the soils. This is another one outside of Ashland. This was a photo was taken before they filled it in with gravel. Here's it filled in with gravel. And also to note, to avoid freezing, it's recommended that these exposed pipes are covered. So they were going to put a box over this. It was just summer, so they, weren't worrying about it at the time. But again, just in terms of avoiding pipes freeze. But this was also a garage, and they had plenty of slope to pipe the water from the tanks. They didn't need a pump. And then this water was used to water some creekside plantings, riparian plantings. And this one is outside of Phoenix. And so this one was really cool because they had kind of a series of overflow options. They were really concerned, understandably, about fire in the area. And so they had one tank just dedicated to fire suppression and another couple tanks that were used for supplemental irrigation. And so these are the irrigation valves they had in their pasture for switching off and on the systems. And they could also attach misters, so that could help water the pasture in case of safety. But this is a continued of the same property. They had a cool pump that was utilized for that, and they also fit their tanks to fit fire hoses, and those tanks were accessible from their driveway. So a way for both irrigation, but also for fire safety. And this was another tank they had off of their home. And this is another one outside of Ashland, again, more engineered, very built up on that hill slope. They had to make sure they were on stable ground. This was another 5,000 gallon tank, I believe. Actually, no, those are two 2,500. So a little smaller than the full 5. But yeah, lots of exposed pipe. Again, they're going to cover this prior to winter, but just goes to show you it can be more simple, more complex, somewhere in between. This definitely was a huge undertaking. If they would have, they told me if they would have redone this again, they absolutely would have hired a contractor because it was a lot of work. But yeah, this is their setup, and they're collecting from their greenhouse. So here are those 3 personal action summaries before we open it to Q&A and our reference discussion. So just kind of to summarize, because I know that was a lot of information. Number 1, you want to determine your water usage and your water capacity priorities on your property. You want to know what you're working with and what water you do need. Then you can place and choose a system that helps meet those needs that you have, obviously ensuring you're following all those local regulations. Then install and maintain your system, and maintain is a huge piece. Just like any project, maintenance is major. If it's not maintained properly, not going to function in a few years' time. So those are the 3 main summaries. Thank you. We're now at our Q&A time. I'm going to type my email in the chat box if folks want to get in touch with me. You can send me an email and we can schedule a site visit, or if you just want to discuss your priorities, pick my brain, feel free to email me, and we can even, schedule a phone call. That's totally fine. So that's my email. I'm just going to start looking at the comment section, but also this is a time when folks can unmute. Let's see. So I see Nicole and Rachel posted things, YouTube channel. Donna asked about Josephine County. So Josephine County does have a soil and water conservation district, but I know that they have a bit of less capacity in terms of actual site visits. So I don't know that at the top of my head, but I can certainly look into that, Donna. I know in the past, my understanding was they were kind of a 1 to 2 person team, so they just had less capacity. You are welcome to use our website for all that technical assistance. And I'm also happy to send you things. I just wouldn't have the capacity to meet out at your site. But if you want to shoot me an email and remind me, I'd be happy to look if that capacity has changed, because I totally hear that outside of Jackson County. Mary asked, will you address rainwater distribution methods, calculating quantities, and pump size? So hopefully I answered that regarding sizing the tank and sizing based on the roof, Mary, but if I didn't, feel free to let me know. But okay, Donna says okay. So if anyone has any questions right now, you're welcome to unmute. I understand if you don't. I'm happy to dive into resources, and then if you happen to have questions, you can totally unmute now, is also the time. So can give you a few minutes to think about that. but I'm happy to have our remaining time, our remaining 30 minutes, just be a little more conversational. So, I'm not seeing any other questions right now, so I'll just go into the resource review. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box or just interrupt me. Okay, so Mary says you have lots of collected water, but not a good method for distribution or calculation of water needs. Okay, so I guess I'm trying to understand what you mean, Mary. I don't know if you mind going off mute. So you have lots of collected water, but you're not sure, are you not sure where to pump or plumb the water?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. No, I have water, but I've gone to irrigation companies and everything else. I would like some guidance for piping water out, directly to plants so I can water individually in a, obviously in a dry season, and I don't want to flood irrigate. I want to, calculate the correct amount of water that's needed by each plant, mainly in the summer, obviously. So I have never found anybody who can offer that.
Okay. If you are able to send me an email, I'm happy to look into that for you. I know, each plant take different amount of water, but we have a lot of guides with the district. We have like a whole resource guide section, and I know SOREC has a huge database for that type of stuff, but feel free to send me an email and then I can send you like specific fact sheets and information. And I'm also happy to go out on site and help as well. It's just kind of hard without seeing the setup, but yeah, I totally hear that. Just kind of, okay, I have this, but now I need to kind of finish the loop in terms of where to get the water.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have a list of folks who can help with the maintenance? So that will depend on contract. So some contractors can help with maintenance, and others, they can at least show you how to maintain. So again, it just depends on if you end up wanting to hire a contractor or not. There also are, if we don't have fact sheets on file for maintenance in particular, I can also send that to you. I'm happy to do follow-up research for folks essentially. So so I think maybe a good starting point, Heather, is if you want to contact me and inquire about the contractor list. And then if those contractors don't do it, there can at least be a guide that I can send you that can help kind of provide that stepwise, if that's helpful. But yeah, my email I put at 6:58 on the chat, and then it's also on screen here. So great. All right, any other questions before I dive into some resources? Okay, so I'm going to dive in, but again, feel free to interrupt me. So, speaking of resources and sending out resources, if this will progress. So I have a few. These are just a few. I know there's so many when it comes to rainwater harvest. It can kind of get to be a lot. So this is that rain barrel guide from the city of Ashland. So I'm not going to open it up right now, but this is listed within those takeaway points. This is a contractor list, so feel free to email me if you're interested in receiving that contractor list. We have a fact sheet on our website, and I will show that to you. I'll kind of jump around a bit. So you can find the rainwater harvest list. The easiest way is just to go to jswcd.org, and then you can type in our search box. If you just type in rainwater harvest, that fact sheet will pop up. It's a 2-page fact sheet that essentially summarizes what we talked about today, but it has all the materials list as well. And then kind of working our way backwards here. Goodness, why is this freezing? Okay, so and then I also included the residential water conservation and adaptation page, which goes over more water conservation tips and tricks. And then stormwater management and water storage rebate program is another one. So that's this one. So this is for folks who are interested in receiving some funds. So this has become a very popular program. I started this program back in 2021, and I've helped fund, I think we've surpassed 30 and have another handful of interested folks. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time explaining how this rebate program works. So this stormwater management and water storage, really rolls off the tongue. But this is designed it's 4 different features are covered through this. Most people apply for the rainwater harvesting just because it checks so many boxes. But folks have also applied for this for rain gardens and swales, and planter boxes are also included as well. So kind of how the program works is, in order to determine eligibility, people have me out on a site visit. And we have at the bottom here is an info sheet that explains all the logistics I'm about to say. So again, no need to memorize all of this. Is all in writing on our website. If you just write in our search box on our website, jswcd.org, if you just search stormwater, even if you just say stormwater rebate, this will pop up. And so folks have me out on a site visit. We determine eligibility. So if you're interested in one of those 4 features, it's covered. The application window, folks have to apply themselves. It's quarterly. So our next application window is October 15th. And it's just us that review. It's just myself and our executive director. So it's not like it has to go through a whole board in order for projects to be approved. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. And so how it works is, once you submit an application, which I have application instructions and everything like that, once an application is submitted and then hopefully approved, you have a full calendar year to install your project. In order for anything that you'd want reimbursed for, it is a reimbursement grant, so it gets paid out at the end. Anything you'd want reimbursed for has to be purchased after the project is approved. I just always like clarifying that. We just have to do that to make sure you don't have something sitting around from years ago and try to get paid for it later. Just a way to kind of make it a little more cut and dry. And so it's a program that really streamlines our other programs. We used to have it where there was a lot more paperwork involved with our applications, and it was a lot of time for everyone and tedious for everyone. And so it just makes it a lot easier, where the actual application packet is the application, and then we have an attachment section that has all of the ordinance information, and it also has fact sheets for all the features, essentially trying to create at least a starting point to get you started with what you need to know in order to install the project. And so I'm trying to think of any other major logistics I missed other than the purchase time and completion, quarterly. I think that's kind of most of it, but yeah, so all those pictures that I showed you as examples, those are all from the rebate program. So those are folks locally that have been able to install systems with our rebate program, and they were reimbursed for it. Some folks were essentially able to get reimbursed for most of the project, because we fund up to $5,000. So if your expenses are $5,000 or less, and we set that amount to $5,000 at the beginning, you're essentially getting all your money back. And if you go over budget, at least you're getting refunded a good amount. We require rough bids with that application. If you're wanting to have us pay for anything beyond just the size of the tank, we essentially default back to $1 a gallon if we don't have bids, just to justify the cost for consistency. But if you want us to pay for contracted services or any like additional plumbing or piping or pumps, we can do that. We just need to know the numbers that we're working with, so we're not just kind of pulling the numbers from thin air. So I've designed the application process to be pretty flexible and kind of cater to folks' needs, and folks have liked it, and it's a nice process on our end. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me if this is of interest to you. And even if you end up not being interested in funds, The packet is honestly pretty useful just from a technical assistance perspective. So I'm happy to send out the appendix page, even not the application page, because it offers some nice fact sheets. And let's see what else. I think I had my main list I was referring back to. Time check, 7:10. We might get out a little early. Hopefully that's okay. Okay, so that was the rebate program. And then, yeah, the stormwater information resources. So that's also on our website. If you just type in our search box, stormwater information, and the Oregon Smart Guide.
Kora.
Yeah.
If someone has already started their rainwater catchment project, they could essentially apply for that to get other parts or the remainder of that project partially covered or fully covered, depending on cost, correct?
Yeah, great question, Nicole. Yeah, so if like Nicole mentioned, we could potentially pay for a portion. So anything that you've already paid for, we wouldn't be able to reimburse because that would have been prior to the approval of the rebate. But we've had a lot of folks where they've maybe already purchased a tank, but they don't know how to hook it up and they don't have the proper plumbing, for example. Then we could help pay for a contractor to come in and actually, connect it all for you. We've also had folks, they've already installed the system, but they want another tank. And so that's, fairly simple. So we've also, helped pay for an additional tank. So we can certainly pay for bits and pieces if you've already, installed one thing and one another. Essentially, for us, we just want to make sure that each thing that we fund is a standalone project. But yeah, if you've already installed a portion of it and it's not already complete, then I think I feel like that's a good way to utilize our tax dollars is to get that finished for you. So great question. So I also included the Oregon Smart Guide that has that state code if you're interested. It's not too long of a packet. Some of these rainwater harvesting packets can be quite long and like intimidating looking. And so I like that because it's kind of, short and sweet. And then I also went ahead and included well water handbook information from the Oregon Water Resources Department. If you are on a well, you're probably aware of this, but I just always like to include it because if you are on a well and thinking about different ways to conserve your water, they have water conservation tips and adaptation information within their actual packet. And so that's a nice thing to start with. And also, regarding well maintenance and everything else is a major piece. I feel bad for folks on wells because I feel like, folks that are on the city, if they have an issue with their water, they can just contact the city. If folks that are irrigating, they're on an irrigation ditch, they can call the irrigation districts. But in a lot of ways, folks that are on wells are kind of on their own, and I don't want you to feel like you're on your own. So there are different programs out there. And I think, Water Resources Department is a really good starting point for that. And then hopefully some of the programs that we offer to offset well water hopefully is helpful for folks. But the next page that I had, or the last page, is a picture of the well handbook. And these should be available. I believe we have some at our office, and I know they're scattered throughout the county at different offices. This is also a PDF that you can find for free online as well. But yeah, good resources to know out there. So Kurt says we're interested in fire suppression. Do you have resources for the contractors that the fire department can use, or the connectors that the fire department can use if needed? So contractors should know about the connectors, Kurt, because they're just, more common. I guess the short and sweet answer is it really depends on the type of tank you're getting. Some tanks, you could just open up the top of the tank and they can just stick the fire hose in it. And other folks will just, based on the fire hose size. So we would just need to know the size, and I don't know that at the top of my head, but I think that might be, okay, 2.5 inches. Thank you, Nicole. So that would be the size to cut into the tank. So most of the times when you get a tank, it's just a whole tank, and then you have to drill the holes yourself, or the contractor does. So that would be the size to drill that. So thank you for that answer,
And you
Nicole.
can also contact the fire district, the department. We're working on providing a tank for them to use for our roadway for any fires that come up. But that's what my husband put in as the thread he put for our tank.
Great. Great to know that insight. I don't always know all those specifics because, you know, we help cater the grants, but I'm not always designing, or, you know, we don't install the actual project. So it's nice to know more hands-on information like that. Any other questions? Okay, 1.5. Okay. That's good to know. I feel like I'm going to add that in my next presentation so folks are aware of those sizes. Thank you for that, Nicole. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we can end a few minutes early here. That was about it, all I had. I know that, I mean, we could get super specific on all these different types of things, but I know after a certain point, it's kind of surpasses the brain capacity. I'm a very hands-on person. I don't know about y'all. So yeah, I'm happy to go out on individual site visits if folks are interested in kind of follow-up information and conversations, and I could give more detailed recommendations on site. Yeah, feel free to contact me with follow-up questions, or if you're interested in our rebate program. And my contact information will also be in those follow-up notes as well. But I think that's all I have for you all this evening. I appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you so much, Kora. And Kurt, just to clarify, as my baby was fussing, my husband was leaning over my shoulder typing in that information. The 2.5-inch NH thread is through the fire district, what they asked us to put in. ODF uses 1.5-inch NH thread, but they also, the ODF has all the adapters. So if you just put the 2.5-inch for the district to use, if ODF comes out, they have the adapters to be able to put on. We have purchased 2 tanks. This is why I asked that question, Kora, about if you already have part of your project started. One tank is the 3,000 gallon that the fire district asked us to have, which is the minimum they will fill up for us for city water, so that they can have it exclusively on our property to protect our community outside of Rogue River. So it's a tank that we purchased that we are giving the fire district complete exclusive access over. We have a 2,500 gallon tank that we are going to catch rainwater for watering our garden. And so we're kind of working on both projects side by side. So if you want a little more information to include, if this comes up again, we're doing some research. We've been talking with the chief over here in the Rogue River to get that information. So I'd be happy to forward that along for you and Brian's project plans if that comes up again in this presentation. I know sometimes they go hand in hand, the two.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for the insight, Nicole. Yeah, I'm happy to relay that information. But yeah, if you have any other specifics, I'm happy to write that down. Yeah, I should also mention I've been doing these projects for several years, but I was just doing mostly water conservation classes. So this is actually my full class specifically for rainwater harvest. So I'll definitely be tweaking this throughout. But yeah, I'm happy to know that insight. I think that's super practical things to recommend to folks. So yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kora. Again, another wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we can't wait to see your next one.
Yeah.
Have a great evening.
Yeah, have a good one, everyone.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close off the meeting. Thank you, Cora.
All right, have a good night.
You too.